Welcome back to Talking Tokens and to another edition of Strata Research, the series where we sit down with our institutional research team to break down one major timely trend across the industry. Last time, Alex and I got into crypto neobanks, the apps rebuilding, the Chime and Revolut playbook on stablecoin rails. And today we're zooming in on one piece of the stack that everybody thinks they understand and Alex and I would probably argue that nobody does almost. The crypto card. Alex just published a report arguing that while the product may have originally been built for consumers, institutions are actually the ones using it. And so I think it's a great story because picture this in your head, someone tapping a metal card, buying coffee with Bitcoin, and it turns out to be almost exactly wrong. So Alex, welcome back on, and I'm sure we'll get into it.
Yeah. Hi. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I know in your report, it opens with a claim that money moving through crypto cards in 2026 mostly isn't retail. And I was actually surprised by that as someone who has been covering this space for a while. So walk us through that. And while you're there, like what actually is a crypto card mechanically? Because you would argue that a lot of them aren't what they actually look like on the surface level.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start off with what is a crypto card. It's pretty straightforward, right? It's a card that is funded with crypto. You can use your stablecoin balance to pay for everyday goods. It's typically powered by Visa or MasterCard. And the user experience is pretty similar to like what you get with a debit or credit card on both sides of it, like from your point of view and also from the merchant point of view. Um, Under the hood, it gets a little more complicated. There's a few different like routes that it can take, right? So basically how they work is that you have an account, you fund it with stable coins, you have a physical card or a virtual card, you do tap to pay at any cafe when you're buying your latte or whatever it is, and then on the back end, Visa or MasterCard is going to go and handle that transaction and basically just like either off ramp the stable coin and then settle the transaction off chain and then send the merchant dollars, or settle the chain or settle the transaction on chain, and then they'll handle the off ramp later and send it to the merchant in dollars. So you're spending in stable coins, the merchant is receiving dollars in fiat. But like under the hood, it gets a little more complicated. Then I want to answer, I guess, the first part of the question that you raised there, which
Yes.
was, who's really using it? I think,
Who's using it? Yeah.
yeah, who's using it, right? I think if like the listeners, if you go and ask your friends, or if you're in crypto, I think it'd be hard pressed to find people that are using stablecoin cards as their daily card.
Yeah.
I
Unless you have
personally
a
don't
ton of
have that many.
stable coins, I don't know if it would make sense, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't have that many. I have a few, but even within the crypto crowd, I think it's very rare. And I think people were looking at this originally thinking this is going to be a huge unlock for consumers, um, but it really hasn't. And there's a few reasons for that. Um, Mostly that the the existing offerings that people have in the U.S. and Western Europe are really good. Why would I switch to using stablecoins when I have my credit card that it has great fraud protection? If a illegal transaction happens, I can cancel it.
Hmm.
I get points. I can book a flight, via my stablecoin, and if I have a problem, then they'll handle it with JetBlue or Delta or whatever. And it takes a long time to like build up the rewards system that people have gotten very accustomed to with stablecoin cards.
So what will it take then to kind of get used to this or maybe make it kind of like a standard practice? Is it kind of like a trust factor thing then?
I think in the US, we might never get there. Um, I think there's probably a world where the cards that people are using now just integrate some sort of stablecoin feature in the future. Visa is actually already kind of working on this adjacently. So they're building, it's called VFC. It's like a system where you can fund your credit card with like multiple different accounts. One of those could be a stablecoin account. So it's like, you could have your Chase Sapphire preferred card. And
Right.
then one of the accounts that you have is just a stablecoin, account. So I think in the US, it'll be very, very difficult. I think it might actually just never happen.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about getting new credit cards, it's because I want like the points or, I have an allegiance to that airline or company. I know some people have the Coinbase card as well, the Cast card, Rain One as well. I mean, we've spoken to them on the show as well. Not all of these companies. but some of them. And
Yeah.
so like I think there's probably demand for it. It's just like you really got to think about like what is the underlying reason and what's driving that consumer behavior, right?
Yeah, actually, I have the Coinbase card, and I use it occasionally, but
Okay.
it's more for me. It's kind of like a novelty aspect. I like spending in
You
stable
whip it
coins
out
because
at the bar. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's kind of fun. Like I like bragging to people that oh I'm using stable coins to pay for this. I don't know if it's really a brag, but um, I think it's
Yeah.
fun. But yeah,
Right.
I think also part of this is we're talking from the framework of we live in the U.S. You know, a lot of the
Hmm.
listeners are American or from Western Europe. For us, it's not a huge unlock, but there are people in the world, specifically like Latin America, Africa, Asia, that this actually is a pretty big unlock for them, and that we have
Hmm.
actually seen real usage there as well. So
Yeah.
I don't want to make
I
it seem
know.
like consumer cards aren't,
Yeah.
you know,
Case by case.
yeah,
And
case
on
by case.
paper, I know the consumer demand looks pretty big. I know you cited that something like 71% of stablecoin holders said they'd spend from a card.
Mhm.
So I guess to the points that we're talking about here, like why do you argue that the developed market consumer card is basically more of a feature in search of a need instead of a need and a feature, or the opposite, inverse?
Yeah.
You get it. Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. I think it's there's a few fronts, right? So I think the crypto market itself, like the crypto native market, is quite small.
Hmm.
And like I said, like within that, the people that actually would use cards is even smaller. So sure, 71% of people might use a stablecoin card, but that doesn't take into account would they fully use that instead of their other credit cards. You are just competing against all these other brands that have, like I said, the rewards programs and all the infrastructure behind it. So I think it becomes like a kind of an uphill battle.
So, what about the actual value of these things then? Like, where do you actually see the value of these cards? Is it kind of on the institutional side, the consumer side, enterprise, fintech? I don't know. I'm
Mhm.
going to throw out a lot of buzzwords. You pick.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, lots to choose from. This is fun. So there definitely is like a lot of value in this, and it's mostly on like we've been talking a lot about the consumer side of things, but on the B2B and institutional side, these things actually do have great adoption. This is kind of what the paper focuses on as well, is that the consumer side is a lot smaller than the B2B side, which is really like where these coins are gaining traction, right? So
Right.
there's a ton of stablecoin payments platforms or card networks like Slash or Dakota or things like that that are servicing business payments. So you got to think, is it a multinational company that has to do a lot of transactions in different currencies? These stablecoin cards actually serve that purpose really well and are actually a huge advantage over what people use today.
What about on the acquisition front? I know there's been a number of those over the past 12 to 18 months. And I think it's honestly a smart move by like some of these traditional payment providers or whatever it may be, is that instead of like building stablecoin infrastructure, payment infrastructure from scratch, they're just like acquiring arguably high quality businesses, right?
Yeah. I think this kind of points to where the value actually is. It's not on the brands themselves. Like, there's just too many actual stablecoin card brands out there, but the infrastructure that supports these brands is quite valuable. So you look at something like Rain, which doesn't actually, really issue or have its own stablecoin card brands themselves. They're more their purpose is to help people build their own brands. So
Mhm.
now with all these people trying to build neobanks and incorporate cards into their products, they're all turning to Rain to issue them their cards. The same thing is true on like the network side of things, right? So like the Visa and Mastercard are the ones actually handling all these transactions, doing all the settlement. The blockchains themselves are also becoming way more valuable from this because all these transactions are flowing through blockchains. Um, so I think we're going to see a lot more acquisitions on more of the infrastructure side as opposed to the actual card brands themselves.
Yeah. I actually had Rain CEO Farouk on last summer. It was about August time. And he was kind of talking about how like building rails that feel familiar is super important. And it's not necessarily about changing consumer behavior, but it's about like upgrading the back end of it, similar to how like mobile phones, streaming services kind of reshape the way we consume things, we interact with people. It wasn't something that happened necessarily overnight, but it's something that kind of comes into the market as maybe just another currency, is what he
Mhm.
said too. So I think it's like an interesting angle on that side too, and like essentially creating like an openness that will maybe change the future of payments, to the point that you're making, if they want to like help enable so many different ones and allow like banks, fintechs, enterprises to integrate stablecoins or tokenized deposits more seamlessly, than I guess maybe the way it is today. So
Yeah, I would agree with that. I
yeah,
think what a lot of these companies are doing is kind of building um, alternatives to the current system, right? So like alternatives to ACH or alternatives to Swift. Just recently, like this week, there's a big consortium of fintechs and financial institutions, and all got together and released a new stablecoin, Open USD. It's Open Standard is like the company that runs it. And basically, like this is the same thing. It's just the alternative to Swift, right? Like we just have all these banks that want to send money back and forth, and we're building the stablecoin that everybody's going to use as the standard here. So I think we're going to see a lot more
yeah.
of that as well.
I also want to talk to you about on-chain credit. Definitely a
Mhm.
hot topic, an area for a lot of builders in the space. You've got a section on it, and there's a part where you say part of it works and part of it just doesn't, which kind of made me laugh because it's so like straightforward, but also true. So kind of break down that split, and why does the unsolved half matter so much in this argument? Because like we could talk about like, okay, this works great, but like what about the other side?
Yeah, I think so. We've had credit for a while on chain, right? You look at something like Aave or Morpho. You can get a loan out and then you can pay it back over time. But those loans are typically over collateralized, right? You have to put more money in than the money you're getting out. So it works. Actually, in some senses, it's better than the traditional system because you can have um, enforceable repayment through software that if you don't pay back the loan, the money that you stored is now gone, right? It gets liquidated and paid back to the lender. Um, that system doesn't really work that well for cards specifically. First of all, it's very capital inefficient, right? You have to put more capital in than you're taking out, and there's some level of value that's left there that's not getting used. And then second of all, for cards, it's very hard. Typical credit cards are completely uncollateralized. They're based off of a defined credit score system that we have where everybody has, we're being ranked constantly by all the transactions that we make. And then also there's legal frameworks for repayment. So with crypto, it becomes a lot trickier because there's no good KYC. The user might be pseudo anonymous or completely anonymous. It could be hard to verify their account balances, how much money they actually make, how strong their ability to pay back a loan is. And then there's no enforcement either. It's hard to, once you give someone money on chain, there's typically no system to
To get back.
force them to
Yeah.
pay back. Yeah. So
Hmm.
there's definitely people working on this, but I think it's still a tough nut to crack. This is probably the last, it will be the last frontier for stablecoin cards, is the ability to offer on chain credit.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about a lot of different things today, Alex. If there's one thing you think the listeners should take away from this and watch over, let's say, the next 6, 12, 24 months, that's a long time in this space, what would it be?
Yeah, I would say keep an eye on the acquisitions, like we talked about. I think they're mostly going to be coming from the infrastructure layer. Things like Rain, I think is perfect, like a perfect example of like something that it's kind of primed to be acquired. I think we're going to probably see a lot of consolidation in the neobank space. I just saw a list this week of 235 different
I
neobanks
saw
that
that list
exist
too.
right now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's crazy. Yeah.
it's too many. And there's not a need for it. We're building too
No.
too many neobanks than
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
want. So I'd say yeah, look at the acquisitions that are coming, and then also look at the consolidation on the neobanks and
Mhm.
card brands side.
Yeah. I think there's a big race right now to see like who will be the leaders on all of these fronts. And like
Mhm.
we're kind of laughing at that 250, 350 list of neobanks, but when you kind of think about how many banks there are in the US, like small to medium sized ones, and then like the massive ones, sure, we can say small to medium, there's probably like hundreds, but like of the actual big ones that are winners, it's a very small list. So I would say on the neobank front, there's definitely going to be consolidation. I would agree with you on that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining us again today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And that was another edition of the Strata Research segment on our Analyst Insights. If there are themes that you want us to break down next, tokenization, stablecoin infrastructure, AI, crypto, DeFi, you name it, let us know. And also, Alex and I would love to know, do you use these stablecoin cards? Leave a comment and we'll see you next time.